Forbidden desires of nuns in medieval history. The convent walls rose high, ancient stone, worn smoothly by centuries of whispered prayers and silent transgressions. Beyond the iron-barred windows, the world continued its march, but within, a different rhythm pulsed, one of obedience, secrecy, and unspeakable desire. Sister Isabella had joined the order at 16, not by devotion, but by decree of her father, a nobleman eager to unburden himself of another dowry. The abbess had welcomed her with open arms, her eyes shadowed with something unnamed yet deeply known. The convent was a place of God, but it was also a place of flesh, where suppression and indulgence danced a precarious waltz. By day, the nuns wore their humility like a habit, their prayers rising like incense toward heaven. By night, the halls whispered with an entirely different kind of worship. The first time Isabella felt it, it came as an electric shiver beneath her rough woolen gown. She had been scrubbing the stone floor of the cloister when Sister Magdalena passed behind her, the edge of her veil brushing against Isabella's cheek. The older nun's fingers grazed her wrist, a touch so fleeting yet deliberate that it set fire to her very bones. Punishment was the veil under which pleasure hid. In the abbess's chamber, transgressions were met with discipline, but the boundary between pain and ecstasy blurred with every measured strike of the birch rod. The abbess, stern in daylight, unraveled in candlelit secrecy, her hands tracing the curve of supple bodies in quiet penance. She called it purification, the nuns called it rapture. In the darkness of their shared chambers, hands found hands, lips found lips, the purity of their vows undone by the heat of longing. Behind locked doors, beneath starched sheets, desire uncoiled, slick and desperate. The night smelled of candle wax and sweat, of unspoken confessions whispered between gasping breaths, of fingers tracing the delicate curve of a collarbone, the warm press of thighs beneath rough linen. Sister Isabella and Sister Magdalena often met in the chapel under the guise of midnight prayer. Kneeling side by side, their fingers intertwined beneath their robes, tracing forbidden verses upon each other's skin. A glance held too long, a brush of shoulders, these were the preludes to indulgence, preludes to nights spent worshipping not the Lord, but the flesh. Sometimes their whispers turned to moans, muffled against each other's lips, their bodies pressed against cold stone, unmindful of their surroundings. Yet, with pleasure came punishment. The abbess, ever watchful, knew the signs of sin. Some nights, Isabella found herself summoned, her wrists bound in soft linen, the birch rod whispering against her skin in a holy chastisement that left her breathless, trembling, aching for more. The other sisters watched, their own bodies taut with a yearning they dared not voice aloud, their own fantasies playing out in the flickering candlelight. Stories of convents held secrets as dark as the candlelit corridors themselves. Some nuns bore the marks of their desires long after the wounds had healed. Some whispered of relics hidden beneath the altar, not of saints, but of objects meant for pleasure, carved in secrecy by the hands of those who had long abandoned their innocence. Others told of the secret tunnels that led to shadowed alcoves where flesh met flesh in sinful harmony, where oaths of celibacy dissolved under the weight of unspoken need. Yet, amid the secrecy, there was a strange sort of freedom. For in a world that would burn them for their sins, within these walls, they were untouchable. Their desires, though condemned, found sanctuary where no man's gaze could reach. And so, in the hush of night, the convent breathed its dual existence, a place of devotion, and a place where discipline and desire, pain and pleasure, faith and flesh, entwined in an unholy rhapsody. Whispers behind the cloister, 12th century Europe, a small abbey nestled in the rolling hills of a secluded village. The abbey is a strict religious order, bound by monastic vows, yet the human emotions and desires of the women inside are as complex as the world outside. Sister Adelina, a young, intelligent nun who is questioning the very foundations of her vows. Abbess Eleonora, the stern and powerful head of the abbey, determined to maintain order, but secretly struggling with her own past. Sister Beatrix, a more experienced nun, who has seen the darker side of monastic life and is both a guide and a warning for the others. Brother Elias, a visiting monk from a nearby monastery, whose presence stirs up unexpected emotions in the nuns. The abbey was quiet in the early morning, the sun's first rays just beginning to slip through the narrow windows of the cloister. Sister Adelina sat by the chapel, her fingers tracing the edge of an old worn prayer book. Her thoughts were 1,000 miles away from the sacred texts she was meant to study. The quiet stillness of monastic life felt suffocating at times. She had been here for 5 years, but her heart still longed for something more, something beyond the cold stone walls and the ever-present prayers. Abbess Eleonora, a formidable woman who had served as the abbey's leader for decades, walked by with her usual air of authority, her eyes sharp as she passed Adelina. There were whispers in the abbey about the abbess's past, rumors of a life before the cloister that might not have been as saintly as her position now demanded. Some said she had once been a noble woman, forced to leave behind a passionate lover, a memory she could never fully erase. Sister Beatrix, the eldest nun, knew the truth about the abbey's darker secrets. She had lived through the rumors and scandals that often swept through their isolated world. The abbey had long been a place where the passions of its inhabitants simmered beneath the surface. Many had entered with pure intentions, but human desires, those forbidden desires, often crept in where they were least expected. One evening, after evening prayers, Sister Beatrix pulled Adelina aside in the dimly lit garden. "You are not the first to feel this way," Beatrix said softly, her voice laced with quiet wisdom. "Desire is not a sin in itself, though we are taught to repress it. But there are consequences for such things." Adelina felt a mix of fear and curiosity. "What do you mean?" "Look at me, child," Beatrix said, her eyes distant. "I was young once too. I came here seeking peace, but I found that desire still clung to me. The heart cannot be tamed so easily. I loved once, and true love is not a thing that can be denied." Adelina swallowed, unsure of how to respond. She had heard whispers of the past lives of nuns, of affairs with monks, of secret meetings in the garden, of lives lived in the shadows. She had even heard rumors of nuns who had been punished for such indiscretions. Some were expelled, while others were forced to undergo harsh penance. It was a late evening when the abbess called a meeting in the chapel. The air was thick with tension as the nuns gathered, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows against the walls. "Tonight, we must address a grave matter," Abbess Eleonora began, her voice steady. "One of our sisters has broken the vows she took. Her actions cannot go unpunished." The room went silent as a young novice, Sister Clara, was brought forward. Her eyes were red, and her hands trembled. The whispers had been circulating for weeks now. The young novice had been seen meeting with Brother Elias, the monk who visited the abbey on occasion. They had been seen in the garden, speaking in hushed tones. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Sister Clara?" Abbess Eleonora's voice was cold, though there was a flicker of something older and more familiar in her eyes. I didn't mean to," Sister Clara stammered. "We spoke of God, of the scriptures, but," she paused, her voice breaking, "but I could not deny the feelings that stirred within me when I was near him. I felt alive." Abbess Eleonora's expression hardened. "And you allowed those feelings to grow. You allowed temptation to consume you." Sister Clara's punishment was swift. She would be locked in the small cell for 3 days, with no food or water. It was a harsh penance, meant to purify her soul and remind her of the sanctity of her vows. As Clara was led away, Adelina felt a pang of sympathy. How many of them had struggled with their desires in silence, never daring to speak them aloud? It was soon after Clara's punishment that Brother Elias returned to the abbey. His presence was like a spark in the dry tinder of the abbey's air, igniting something deep within the walls. He was kind, gentle, and unassuming, but the nuns, especially the younger ones, could not ignore the way his eyes lingered on them, or how his soft voice seemed to cut through the tension that normally filled the cloister. Sister Adelina caught his gaze one day as she passed him in the garden. There was something in his eyes, something that made her heart race. She quickly looked away, chastising herself for such thoughts. She was a nun, bound by vows she could not break, but the pull was undeniable. They met in secret, in the dark corners of the abbey, where no one would see. They spoke of faith, of philosophy, and of the world beyond these walls. But as the days passed, their conversations deepened, and the line between temptation and devotion began to blur. The abbess soon learned of the growing bond between Brother Elias and the nuns. She had seen the way Sister Adelina's eyes sparkled when he entered the room, the way the other nuns' voices softened when they spoke of him. The temptation had spread like wildfire through the abbey. She could not allow it to continue. One cold morning, the abbess called Adelina to her office. "You have betrayed the vows you made," Eleonora said, her voice soft but unwavering. "You have allowed yourself to fall prey to temptation." Adelina's heart sank. "I didn't mean to, abbess. I never wanted this." "You have sinned, Adelina," Eleonora said, her gaze fixed. "And now you must pay the price." The punishment was not as severe as Sister Clara's, but it was no less significant. Adelina was assigned to the most grueling tasks within the abbey, chopping wood, scrubbing the floors, and working from dawn until dusk. The penance was meant to remind her of her duties and the price of yielding to her desires. Years passed, and the abbey's life went on. Adelina grew older, her youthful longing tempered by the realities of monastic life. Brother Elias moved on to another monastery, and the whispers of forbidden love faded into the past. But the abbey had changed. The nuns, like all women, had desires that could not always be suppressed. And while their punishments were harsh, their hearts remained full of the human spirit, the same spirit that had always thrived in the shadows of history. I hope you found the details of this story as fascinating and unsettling as I did. You, mysterious, curious, intellectual, disturbed, beautiful people. My name is Penny Flick, with Kreep-ish. I look forward to sharing more of these stories that captivate and intrigue our minds, which can challenge our way of thinking. Comment on your thoughts below as I continue to uncover the mysteries of our history, true crime, paranormal, conspiracy, and cringe-worthy, creepy content. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember that the truth is often stranger than fiction.